My name is Imran. I am 38 years old, a husband to Ayesha, and a father to two beautiful children, Amina and Bilal. We lived in Noorabad, a small town surrounded by endless fields and quiet hills. Life was simple but content. Ayesha would tend to the house, and I worked as a teacher at the local school. Amina, our eldest at 10 years old, was the curious one, always asking questions about the world. Bilal, only 7, was our little adventurer, often lost in his imagination with his toy car. Life was good, but the signs of change began to appear. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, there was a distant rumble. At first, I thought it was thunder, but the sky was clear. Ayesha looked at me, worry in her eyes. "What was that, Imran?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's probably nothing," I said, trying to reassure her, but deep down I wasn't sure. The next day, the streets of Noorabad were filled with whispers. "The war is moving closer," a shopkeeper said as I bought bread. "The soldiers are only a few towns away." I felt a chill run down my spine. Noorabad had always been peaceful, untouched by the chaos of the outside world, but now it seemed that peace was slipping away. Over the next few days, the tension in the town grew. Families began to leave, packing whatever they could carry. I saw my neighbors, people I had known for years, loading carts with their belongings. "Are we leaving too, Baba?" Amina asked one evening as we sat together. I looked at her innocent face, not knowing how to answer. "Not yet," I said, "but we'll be ready if we need to." That night, Ayesha and I stayed awake, whispering plans. "We'll pack some essentials," she said, her voice shaking. "Clothes, food, and water." I nodded, my mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. It happened suddenly. One night, the distant rumble of war grew louder. Explosions lit up the horizon, and the air was filled with the sound of gunfire. I woke up to Ayesha shaking me. "Imran, wake up! We need to leave," she cried. I grabbed the children, who were both trembling with fear, and we ran outside. The streets were filled with chaos, people running, shouting, and crying. Smoke filled the air, and the once familiar town of Noorabad was unrecognizable. "Stay close to me," I shouted, holding Amina's hand tightly while Ayesha carried Bilal. We made our way to the edge of town, where a small group of families had gathered. There was no time to think, no time to plan. We just ran, leaving behind the life we had built. The first night was the hardest. We found shelter in an abandoned building, huddling together for warmth. The children cried themselves to sleep, and Ayesha clung to me, her face buried in my chest. "Imran, what are we going to do?" she whispered. "We'll keep moving," I said, though I had no idea where we were going. The next morning, we joined a group of families heading toward the mountains. They said it was safer there, away from the fighting. We walked for hours, the children growing tired and hungry. By the third day, our supplies were running low. Amina's face was pale, and Bilal could barely keep up. "Baba, I'm hungry," Amina said, her voice weak. I gave her the last piece of bread, ignoring the gnawing hunger in my own stomach. Ayesha looked at me, her eyes filled with worry. We need to find food, Imran, she said. I nodded, knowing she was right. But finding food in a war-torn land was no easy task. That evening, I ventured into a nearby village while Ayesha and the children stayed hidden in the woods. The village was eerily quiet, its streets littered with debris. I found a small shop that had been looted, but there was still a bag of rice and a few cans of food left. As I reached for the rice, I heard footsteps behind me. Turning around, I saw a soldier, his rifle pointed at me. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "My family. They're starving," I said, my voice trembling. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he lowered his gun. "Take it and leave. Quickly." I grabbed the food and ran, my heart pounding. That night, as we ate a small meal of rice and canned vegetables, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to losing everything. Ayesha looked at me, her hand resting on mine. "You're doing so much for us, Imran. Thank you." I nodded, but the weight of responsibility felt heavier than ever. After days of walking, we reached a small village nestled in the mountains. The villagers were kind, offering us food and shelter. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope, but I knew the war wasn't far behind us. The mountains gave us shelter, but they couldn't protect us from the fear that lingered in every breath. For a few days, the children laughed again, playing near the streams that trickled through the valley. Amina braided flowers into her hair, while Bilal raced pebbles down the water's current. Watching them, I almost believed we could rebuild a sense of normalcy. But deep down, I knew this was temporary. War never truly stayed away. In the village, we stayed with an elderly couple, Hamid and his wife Maryam. Their kindness was endless, even though they had so little to share. "Your children remind me of my own," Maryam said one evening, as she handed Amina a warm bowl of lentil soup. Her voice cracked as she added, "They didn't survive the last war." Her words sank into my chest like stones. Was that what awaited us too? I shook the thought away, focusing on the soup that warmed Amina's tired face.
Hamid, sitting beside me, spoke in a low voice. "The soldiers passed through the next village. It's only a matter of time before they come here."
I gripped my knees, the familiar weight of dread pressing down. "What do you suggest we do?" "You have children," he said. "Leave before it's too late." That night, I sat with Ayesha by the fire outside the small hut. The stars were hidden behind thick clouds, mirroring the heaviness in my heart. "We can't stay," I said softly. Ayesha nodded. "But where will we go?" I didn't have an answer. The roads ahead were dangerous, the forests filled with soldiers and bandits alike. But staying meant putting Amina and Bilal at risk. "We'll head east," I decided. "There's a larger camp there. Maybe we'll find safety." We left the village before sunrise, thanking Hamid and Maryam for their kindness. Maryam hugged Amina tightly, her old hands trembling. "Be brave, my child," she whispered. As we walked through the valley, the air grew colder. Bilal clung to my hand, his little legs struggling to keep up. Amina carried a small bundle of clothes, her face unusually quiet. The mountains turned into forests, the path narrowing with every step. Every snap of a twig made us freeze, listening for the sound of approaching danger. One evening, as we rested beneath the trees, Bilal began to cough. His small body shook with each breath, and his face grew pale. Ayesha placed her hand on his forehead. "He's burning up," she said, her voice tight with panic. I searched through our meager supplies, but we had no medicine. The nearest village was miles away, and the thought of leaving them alone was unbearable. Ayesha took a deep breath, her determination shining through her fear. "I'll take care of him. You keep Amina safe." She cradled Bilal in her arms, humming softly to soothe him. Watching her, I realized how much strength she carried, always protecting the children, even when her own heart was heavy. As night fell, the distant hum of trucks echoed through the forest. My body tensed. "Soldiers! Get up!" I whispered, shaking Amina awake. Ayesha, exhausted but alert, pulled Bilal closer. We moved quietly through the trees, each step careful to avoid making noise. The trucks grew louder, headlights cutting through the darkness. Amina tripped on a root, her gasp louder than it should have been. I pulled her up quickly, but it was too late. "Who's there?" a voice shouted. I motioned for Ayesha and the children to hide behind a thick cluster of bushes. My heart raced as footsteps approached. I stepped into the open, raising my hands. The soldier's flashlight blinded me. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Just a father trying to keep his family safe," I said, my voice steadied despite the fear that gripped me. The soldier studied me for a moment before lowering his weapon. "Go, and don't come back this way." I nodded, backing away slowly. When I returned to the bushes, Ayesha was clutching the children tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You could have been killed," she whispered. "I won't let anything happen to you," I replied, my voice firm. Days passed, and Bilal's fever worsened. He could barely walk, his tiny frame growing weaker. Ayesha's eyes were red from sleepless nights, and even Amina had stopped asking questions. We reached a small clearing where a stream trickled through the rocks. I washed Bilal's face with the cold water, hoping to bring down his fever. "Baba," Amina said softly, sitting beside me. "Is Bilal going to die?" Her words cut through me like a knife. I pulled her close, pressing her head against my chest. "No," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "We won't let that happen." One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Bilal's breathing grew faint. Ayesha held him tightly, rocking him back and forth. "Stay with us, my son," she whispered, her tears falling onto his small face. I knelt beside her, my hand on his tiny chest, feeling the faint rise and fall of his breath. But then it stopped. Ayesha let out a wail, the sound echoing through the forest. Amina buried her face in my shirt, her sobs shaking her small body. I held them both, my own tears falling silently. The pain was unbearable, a hollow emptiness that consumed me. We buried Bilal beneath a large oak tree, marking the spot with a pile of stones. Ayesha placed his toy car on top, her hands trembling. "Goodbye, my son," she whispered. "I'm sorry we couldn't protect you." I stood beside her, my fists clenched. I had failed. As a father, as a protector, I had failed. But as I looked at Amina, her tear-streaked face filled with pain, I knew I couldn't give up. That night, I sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Ayesha sat beside me, silent but present. "I promised I would protect all of you," I said, my voice breaking. "And you have," she replied. "You've done everything you can, and now we have to keep going. For Bilal, for Amina." Her words gave me strength, though the pain lingered. I took a deep breath, holding Ayesha's hand tightly. "We'll survive this," I said. "We have to." The night after Bilal's burial was one of the longest nights of my life. The air felt heavier, the silence sharper, and every crackle of the fire seemed to echo his absence. Ayesha sat close to me, her body shivering despite the warmth of the flames. Amina, exhausted from crying, had fallen asleep on her mother's lap. We were broken, but the war didn't care. The world didn't stop. We had to move forward. The next morning, as the sun rose behind the trees, we prepared to leave. Ayesha's face was pale, her eyes hollow. She wrapped Bilal's toy car in a piece of cloth and tucked it into her bag. "What are you doing?" I asked gently. "I can't leave it behind," she said, her voice cracking. "It's all we have left of him." I nodded, unable to argue. Amina, quiet but observant, held my hand as we began walking again. She hadn't spoken since Bilal's death, and her silence worried me. As we made our way through the dense forest, the terrain became more treacherous. Ayesha stumbled on the uneven ground, and I caught her before she fell. "Are you okay?" I asked, concern etched into my voice. She nodded weakly. "Just tired." We'd barely eaten in days. The little food we'd scavenged was long gone, and our water supply was dwindling. Amina's cheeks were sunken, her once bright gray eyes scavenged, her once bright gray eyes now dull. "Baby," she said softly, her voice raspy. "I'm thirsty." I handed her the last sip of water from our bottle, ignoring the dryness in my own throat. Ayesha looked at me, her expression a mix of gratitude and sorrow. By the third day, we reached the edge of the forest, where a small road cut through the landscape. It seemed abandoned, but I knew better than to trust appearances. "We'll cross quickly," I whispered, motioning for Ayesha and Amina to stay close. As we stepped onto the road, the sound of an engine roared in the distance. My heart raced as a military truck appeared over the hill, its tires kicking up dust. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Amina's hand and pulling her toward the trees. The soldiers shouted behind us, their voices harsh and commanding. Bullets tore through the air, and I felt Ayesha stumble. "No!" I turned, my heart stopping as she fell to the ground. "I'm okay," she gasped, clutching her ankle. Just go. I couldn't leave her. I pulled her arm over my shoulder, forcing her to stand. Amina clung to my other hand, her face pale with fear. Together, we stumbled into the safety of the trees, the soldiers' voices fading behind us. Ayesha's ankle was swollen and bruised. She could barely put weight on it, and every step was agony. I found a sturdy branch to use as a crutch, but our pace slowed to a crawl. We can't keep going like this, she said, tears streaming down her face. I'm holding you both back. Don't say that, I replied firmly. We're a family. We stick together. Amina knelt beside her mother, her small hands brushing away the tears. We'll help you, Mama, she said softly. Breaking her silence for the first time in days, her words gave us strength. After days of struggle, we finally saw it, the camp. Tents stretched across the horizon, surrounded by makeshift fences and guarded entrances. The air smelled of smoke and sweat, but to us, it was a sanctuary. We approached the gate where a soldier stopped us. Names? He asked, his tone sharp. Imran, I said, my voice hoarse. This is my wife, Ayesha, and my daughter, Amina. The soldier eyed us suspiciously before nodding to us. The tent we were given was small and cramped, but it was better than the open forest. For the first time in weeks, we had a roof over our heads. Ayesha's ankle was treated by a volunteer medic who gave her bandages and painkillers. Amina clung to my side, her small frame trembling as she looked around at the other refugees, people with hollow eyes and faces etched with despair. I don't like it here, Baba, she whispered. Huh? I know, I said, holding her close. But it's safe. That's what matters. In the camp? Oh, we just do make good things happen. In the camp, there was a small area where children played. Amina was hesitant at first, but I encouraged her to join them. Go, my love, I said, brushing her hair out of her face. You need to smile again. She nodded slowly, walking toward the other children. I watched as she introduced herself, her voice quiet but steady. Within minutes, she was running and laughing, a sound I hadn't heard in what felt like an eternity. Ayesha smiled weakly beside me. She's so strong, she said. She takes after her mother, I replied, squeezing her hand. But even in the safety of the camp, the war found ways to haunt us. Food was rationed and the line stretched for hours. The nights were cold, and the thin blankets we were given did little to keep us warm. One evening, as we sat around a small fire, a man from another tent approached us. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken. You've lost someone too, haven't you? It was such a shock to the system in the rain. You've discussed this perhaps 1,000 times. As a citizen of Chekvit, we feel for you. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He sighed, staring into the flames. We all have. Despite the hardships, there were moments of kindness that reminded me humanity wasn't lost. Amina told me about her brother. She said one evening, last year, a woman we both knew fade. A female housemaid to a court, a woman to a saint. The squirrels, my kittens. And the days from back when the sun was last falling. So do we, I replied, my throat tightening. Fatima placed a hand on my shoulder. You're doing everything you can for her, for your family. Don't lose hope. That night, as Amina slept beside Ayesha, I sat outside the tent, staring at the stars. The pain of losing Bilal still burned, but I felt a small flicker of hope. I could do this, I whispered to myself. I feel the smallest flicker of hope. The days in the camp turned into weeks and then months. Life was far from easy, but it had become our new normal. Ayesha's ankle had healed enough for her to walk again, though she still limped. Amina had started to smile more often, spending her days with the other children, but the weight of the past lingered in our hearts like a shadow we couldn't escape. The war, though distant, was always present in our minds. Every time we heard a distant rumble or a sudden shout, we froze. There was no guarantee of safety, even here. But amidst the uncertainty, I knew one thing. We had to keep going. Life in the camp was a constant struggle. Food rations were barely enough to sustain us, and the long lines to get them stretched our patience and strength. One cold morning, as Ayesha and I stood in line for bread, Amina stayed back at the tent, helping an elderly woman nearby with her chores. "Do you think this will ever end?" Ayesha asked, her voice barely audible. I looked at her tired face, the lines of worry etched deeper every day. "It has to," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. She nodded, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The cold was biting, but the hunger was worse. Amina surprised me every day. Despite the loss she had endured, she had found a way to adapt. She spent her time drawing pictures in the dirt, teaching younger children games, and offering small loaf of bread. Before she reached out and took a cup of bread, "Fatima gave it to me," she said, smiling. I knelt down to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're becoming stronger every day, my love," I said. She nodded, but hesitated before asking, "Do you think Bilal would be proud of me?" Her question pierced my heart. I held her tightly, my voice trembling as I said, "He would be so proud. He's watching over us, Amina, always." One morning, a small group of volunteers arrived at the camp with supplies. Among them was a young man named Yusuf, who brought toys and books for the children. Amina's eyes lit up as he handed her a brightly colored ball. "Thank you," she exclaimed, her smile wide and genuine. Seeing her laugh as she played with the other children felt like a balm to my wounded soul. Ayesha and I sat together, watching her with pleasure. "She's our light," Ayesha said softly. "She is," I agreed. But the camp wasn't without its challenges. Tensions were rising as resources grew scarcer, and rumors of the war spreading closer reached our ears. One night, a group of refugees decided to leave the camp, hoping to find safer grounds farther north. They approached me, urging us to join them. "It's only a matter of time before this place becomes unsafe," one man said. I looked at Ayesha, her face pale with worry. "What do you think?" I asked. "We've lost so much already," she said. "But staying here feels like waiting for something terrible to happen." I knew she was right. We couldn't stay forever. We packed our belongings once again, leaving behind the small sense of stability we had built in the camp. Amina clutched her ball tightly while Ayesha carried Bilal's toy car, wrapped safely in cloth. The journey north was treacherous. The roads were littered with abandoned vehicles and debris, and the cold wind cut through our clothes like a knife. "Keep moving," I said, holding Amina's hand tightly. "We're almost there." One evening, as we rested in the ruins of an old farmhouse, the sound of distant gunfire filled the air. Amina clung to Ayesha, her small body trembling. "Will they find us, Baba?" she whispered. "No," I said firmly. "I won't let anything happen to you." We stayed awake that night, the fear of discovery keeping us on edge. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind felt like a threat. Days later, we finally reached a larger refugee camp near the border. This camp was different, better organized, with more resources and medical care. The sight of clean water and proper shelters brought tears to Ayesha's eyes. "We made it," she whispered, her voice filled with relief. Amina ran ahead, exploring the new surroundings. I watched her, a small smile forming on my face. In the new camp, life slowly began to stabilize. Ayesha started helping in the kitchen, preparing meals for the refugees. Amina attended informal classes taught by volunteers, her curiosity reigniting. One evening, as we sat together outside our new shelter, Amina handed me a drawing. It was a picture of our family, me, Ayesha, herself, and Bilal. "I miss him," she said, her voice soft. "I do too," I replied, my throat tightening. "But he's always with us, in our hearts." Ayesha placed her hand on mine, her eyes shining with determination. "We've come so far, Imran. We can't give up now." The days turned into weeks, and though the pain of our loss never faded, we found ways to move forward, even if only in small ways. Amina's laughter returned, and Ayesha's strength inspired those around her. As for me, I found solace in knowing I had kept my family safe even through the darkest of times. One morning, news spread through the camp. The war was ending, peace talks had begun, and though the scars of the conflict would remain, there was hope for a brighter future. As I stood outside our shelter, watching the sunrise, Amina ran to me, her face glowing with excitement. "Baba, does this mean we can go home?" I knelt down, holding her close. "Maybe one day," I said, "but for now, we have each other, and that's enough." Ayesha joined us, ready to rebuild our lives, one step at a time. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share. See you in the next video.